Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Security Noise, Who's on My Network. I'm your host, Geoff Walton. I lead our application security practice at TrustedSec. This episode looks at threat hunting with Senior IR Consultant Shane Hartman and Principal IR Consultant Justin Vaicaro. I also have our producer, Skyler Tuter, on here as usual to keep us on topic and ensure the show sounds great. I do have one announcement. If you have questions about the show, or maybe you want to contribute a topic you'd like to hear from our guests on, we now have our own channel on TrustedSec's Discord server. You can go to discord.gg/TrustedSec to join. And now I'd like to take a moment to give our panel a chance to introduce themselves. Justin, we'll start with you. Tell us a little bit about what you do at TrustedSec and who you are.
Yeah, hey, Justin Vaicaro, work here on the incident response team. Primarily do a lot of incident response, of course, but a heavy set of the work that I love to do is obviously on the threat hunting side. So I've built, through other counterparts on the team, the service itself, we've got a lot going on this side. We've put together a lot of training as of recently on top of it. Got some program building training around that, some workshop training and so forth. My counterpart here, Shane Hartman, I'll go ahead and transition over to him, but he was a heavy part of, kind of helping building this out this year.
Thanks, Justin. Just to tail off of what he has, we do the same thing in the incident response corridor there, handling day-to-day incidents as they come in for different organizations that have issues, whether it be malware, email compromise, or just any other thing that kind of comes in. And in addition to that, we do tabletop exercises, training, and other activities that are related to IR type practices.
Excellent. And on a personal note, Shane, you've published something recently?
Yes, actually, I finished a book. It's an introduction to information security. It has some threat hunting. It also has malware analysis and other things. I originally wrote it for a class that I teach, because I actually teach at the University of South Florida on the side. That I wrote it for those students. So it's more of an intro type of thing. It discusses everything from the attack kill chain, from footprinting to scanning to get into actual exploitation of Windows, Linux systems, social engineering, and finally ends up in cloud and IoT at the very end. So it's kind of like it's not super deep, but it's comprehensive and covers a lot of areas.
And where can people get that?
You can get it from Amazon, or you can get it from any of your other booksellers that you might have it available.
Okay, cool. Well, the beginning is probably a great place to start with this topic, threat hunting. I think it's one of those things in InfoSec that is maybe not as familiar to folks as the typical pen test or application assessment or even social engineering type assessments they've done in the past. When and where and how do I get started with threat hunting, and when do I need to do it?
Yeah, I guess I'll
Justin, you want to start?
Yeah, I'll run with it for to get it kind of going here. So basically, from what we've encountered through the multiple engagements we've done, through the training that we've run into, a lot of organizations, as you stated, Geoff, there is that they don't even know where to get started or how to get started, or even kind of what a sustained threat hunting set of activities looks like. So usually, organizations can just look at, okay, what threats are important to us. They may not even know. So ways of looking at it are like organizations, it's kind of looking at it from a business sector. And then from there, building out, what threats have been impacting, we'll even call it competitors or what have you. We'll call it maybe even partners if it's a shared, infrastructure that they're using there as far as from a communication perspective. Other ways to look at it are, maybe higher up. What type of threat groups are actually impacting our organization? From those threat groups, you can start to understand or map out TTPs, the tactics, techniques, and procedures. From there, it kind of just segues into maybe even identifying frameworks you can use. We'll just throw out there, the popular framework that pretty much everyone should know, or if they're not, they can become acquainted with it now, but it's the MITRE ATT&CK framework. That's an easy benchmark to use that's community driven. It's constantly updated. It's constantly evolving. And so that would be an easy kind of just introductory way of how, organizations can map out from there. But then what they run into is, how do you sustain it? Then you start talking about, team structures, from an operational standpoint, who actually has the skill set to do threat hunting. What does that look like ongoing? Will you start looking at cadence? Can they even maintain a cadence, or are they going to be stuck in this perpetual one-off threat hunting? Or maybe even to put a pause there and understand, from threat hunting, you have more of a planned threat hunt, or you have an IR based threat hunt, so that you have an incident that pops off, but then have parallel activity of threat hunting that goes on that are based off indicators of compromise or IOAs that are attributed for the given activity that's taken place. But not to steal all the thunder there, I'll transition it over to Shane. Is there anything else that you think is valuable to add there?
Yeah, well, I'll kind of dovetail back to the beginning. Usually these things come out of a couple different incidents. It's either like an exercise or a tabletop or something that points out a whole bunch of gaps that the organization might have. As Justin already pointed out, there's an IR threat hunt where there's some incident or something that's occurred out on the internet and they want to know if they're vulnerable to it. But even going before that, once they realize that threat hunt is something that they might want to do, usually it's like this big beast and they don't know how to actually kind of take it in. And we preach a lot about the crawl, walk, run, where we start out, you kind of got to understand where you are, and then that's kind of your crawling, and then you can walk from there and get from point A to point B. And then finally, once you kind of get your grip about that, then you can do what we call the run, which is where you're actually starting to get some real meat on the bones and some telemetry to show you effectively turning over your threat hunts and being able to produce actionable results. You got anything on that part there, Justin?
Yeah, it's actually a good segue because we've put together some very robust training from these engagements, from the ideas that we've extracted working with clients. So we have first level looking at it from the program level, which is, looking at things holistically. So we have, 2 weeks worth of training there to help clients work from, say, like initial stages. And then once we get that output from there, we give them roughly about a 6-month time frame. And then we dive into, say, like the second phase, which is more of the advanced kind of spin-off program building around the threat hunting practice itself. Then on the other side, we look at things, another set of training that we've also built out is more operational based. So this is a very condensed set of training. It's 2 days worth. So we have 1 day just fully dedicated to, I'm not going to call it theory, but a well-versed overview of what threat hunting is. So it's exactly what we're talking about. And then what we have is the second portion of that is very robust set of labs that the students would actually participate in, and it's built around how kind of Shane was talking about, an incident scenario taking place and then threat hunting based off of that. So we walk students through what an actual incident attack chain looks like, and then from that attack chain we break it out into phases. So we look at attack phases and then help the students understand offensive, defensive, and a forensic mindset on how to actually, tackle threat hunting. So from what our experience has given us is that many threat hunters or people who want to embark on threat hunting only look at it, say, from maybe a defensive mindset. What can they find? Without actually peeling the layers of what what an offensive mindset looks like, what the tool looks like, pop the hood open, understand the functionality of the tool. You're really not going to understand the deeper levels of threat hunting and how to go about doing it. But then as we gain from the incident response side, we're also looking at it from a forensic perspective. What is left behind, or the residue, what we like to call it, from that, offensive activity that may also have attributes to threat hunt against. So that's maybe just some additional things to kind of pivot off to maybe help, the audience understand there's additional capabilities that, we could bring to the table there to help educate. Because that's another big proponent that we've learned also from our engagements is not just to do the engagements, but the knowledge transfer that takes place. In fact, that's actually one of the most rewarding components of it is when you see the light bulbs start to click, whether it's, through post engagement or through training engagements that we have, actually watching people understand, oh, this is how we should be threat hunting, not taking like a detection engineering blog post and say, here, let me copy and paste that, put it into my sim, do a threat hunt, and then move on our way, right? So it's helping understand a more methodical approach into threat hunting.
So for a lot of organizations, then, does establishing an ongoing threat hunting practice, is that something that they tend to do after, they've had an incident and been through the IR exercise around that and gone, hey, we don't want to be here again? Or
yeah, that's actually kind of best case scenario. In many cases, that's not necessarily the outcome of it. It's kind of like, okay, you've helped us through this incident. We understand, say, like our security recommendations, and one of the recommendations is to do a gap analysis. Many people think of threat hunting as a gap analysis exercise. Maybe in some cases it is. But what we help with, say, maybe pushing more of the training is to help just what you brought up. Why it is important to continue to have, threat hunting activities, more planned activities, not haphazard. We call them ad hoc activities that take place. Shane, you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, like what Justin's saying there with the ad hoc, it's you get some bit of information out on the internet or some report, and you start just shooting blindly in your network looking for it. That's not anything like what we preach. We want them to understand their network and their behaviors and the process. And then also with your SIMs and with your alerting mechanisms, remember, those are tuned for a global audience. It's meant for everybody to be able to take in, and hopefully you find that. Kind of like to use kind of like an analogy of like a sniper versus a hunter. A sniper is trained to actually do one thing and they do it really well, but a hunter actually takes the process of trying to understand the landscape. They're trying to understand what the behavior of the animal is. They're trying to understand all these elements that come into place so that they can have a successful hunt. And they also, from that particular thing, they can determine when things are out of place too. A classic example of that would be just a user login. If a user logs in 8 to 5 every day and then suddenly they log in at 2 a.m. in the morning, that's a behavioral change. A lot of your SIMs may not necessarily pick that up because it's not trained to do that. You would know, hey, it's the end of the quarter and they're supposed to be actually working at 2 a.m. because they're doing a financial analysis report and they have to get it out. You can make that assessment because you understand the behavior and telemetry of your own network, which is something that people who produce alerts and agents and all that, they're not going to know your network better than you do.
Well, let me ask another question. So I'm a CIO type and I'm listening to this and, this all sounds good. I want to start doing, threat hunting, and I'm going to send some of my people to Justin's class. Then we'll have a threat hunting team. What kind of resources do I realistically need internally to have threat hunting be a day-to-day part of my InfoSec operation?
Yeah, it's actually one of the topics, that we cover, especially at the program level training. And it's because in that training, it's basically think of everybody within the chain. You've got, ground level people in the trenches, doing the analysis day in and day out. But we also have management level and leadership level that basically participate in that training. So what this helps us once we get to this topic is to help them understand, how do you build out the team? What does that look like, to exactly your point? So what we focus around is, what's the operational capability? Meaning, what's the skill set that you actually have on staff? Are they junior staff members? Do you have anybody who's senior? And then from that, what type of activities are they doing? If they're doing SOC analysis and then triage, okay, well, they have the capability there. We just have to wrap their heads around as far as what they're doing. If they're digging into alerts and they're actually investigating, well, they're actually doing a form of hunting in a certain respect. So we're helping them understand that. But what we're also doing and is pivoting back to the mindset. A threat hunter has to have a specific mindset. Again, they can't be blinders on. I'm a defensive person. I'm only looking at it from a defensive perspective as you're looking at telemetry. Again, you have to break your mind out of that little bubble and then, really invest time and effort into understanding offensive tactics, techniques, mindset, especially on the mindset, because again, if you can't think like an attacker, you're not going to be able to defend properly, right? So you're not really going to understand, the path that an attacker would take. That kind of pivots into, again, looking at it, do we dive into other teams and extract them to help with the threat hunting activities? So as we're building out a temporary team, what does it look like, long term? Okay, well, long term, we're not going to have the headcount, to get what we need. So can we extract people on a temporary basis, to build out this effort? And then what does that cadence look like? So again, you're looking at it from a cadence perspective, and we're looking at how many hunts can we map out a week, a month, over a quarter? What does that look like? So again, we're helping them put together this plan of attack and helping them think big picture, because again, they may not have the readily available resources or capability now, but what does that look like over time? And that's what we help them understand, kind of the topics that I covered there. Shane, anything I may have missed there?
No, you kind of covered it, but just to add to that, it's back to that crawl, walk, run. When you get all these basic pieces that are put in there, and you can get to where you don't have to have as heavy latent a staff, because you're being able to pull telemetry in that's actionable with less resources, so to speak. So it makes it more efficient over the long term. So it starts out one way, and then it gets to where you can get that information with a little bit less staff as it goes along. It just takes time.
Yeah, it's definitely not going to happen overnight. It's something that if they don't have the current capability, they're not going to be able to kind of just flip a switch and immediately become a threat hunting, capable team. Because as we all know, most organizations have very small security teams. You can look at some of the biggest organizations and you'd be amazed at how small their actual security staff is. So many of the operational staff are wearing multiple hats. So again, threat hunting is now just an additional administrative burden or task, that they would be doing. So now we're looking at, okay, how much time, can you actually invest on it? So maybe that kind of segues a little bit into helping leadership understand how can you map out the ROI associated with your threat hunting activity. So that's actually something very important, because if you're going to ask additional time and effort of people, you have to be able to identify, okay, what is going to be the output of that invested time. So we help them understand some of the metrics and everything else that they can target out of the gate. And then over time, how can they evolve those metrics to be a little more meaningful as capabilities increase.
Well, how has threat hunting changed over time then? Obviously, somebody gets an idea in InfoSec and they start trying stuff, and it's usually expensive and not terribly productive at the start. But sooner or later, we start to understand the value proposition a little bit better. It's positioned correctly, and it turns into a valuable, useful activity like pen testing and red teaming have become. So, what's been the evolution of threat hunting there?
Yeah, I think, again, as people learn a little bit more about what threat hunting truly is, and then as they learn what the actual positive outcome of it is, it has evolved, I would say, to a point where organizations are identifying, or I would say becoming more aware of what proactive means versus reactive. And I think that's kind of like it may be a cliche kind of, piece to add in there, but it actually is something that's important, because as we talked about, many times threat hunting is an output of reactive alerts, reacting to an alert and then, doing threat hunting around indicators of compromise that were extracted, from those alerts. When you start looking at threat hunting, you really want to impress upon, the audience who you're talking to is the preventative aspects or the proactive nature of what threat hunting is. You're trying to identify a threat that basically has circumvented all your security deployed tools. That's really what it comes down to. So again, when I threw out that little phrase around the gap analysis, really that's part of what threat hunting is. And I would say some of that evolution is because you're diving a little deeper into, and Shane brought this up, understanding your security infrastructure. So as a threat hunter, you actually have to become very aware, very in tune, and very understanding of capabilities of said deployed tools, so that you can understand, okay, currently these tools are going to be able to detect and respond to these types or this said set of techniques based around these tactics. And then what a threat hunter is, as it becomes more evolved, as we learn more, it's understanding, oh, okay, so my hunt should actually fill those gaps, because what I understand of what's being detected, there's going to be a gap in, say, a set of techniques that would have, say, multiple, or we'll call it 5 variations. But I know my security tools are only going to realistically see 2 of those. So when we're doing our threat hunting, we're actually going to hunt around those 3 techniques that are not being, identified as far as we know. So again, that's looking at the evolution. So the evolution can be, okay, threat hunting in the past was, okay, I'm going to throw a detection into said security tool. I'm going to let it do its automation, and then we respond to it. That, in essence, in some people's minds, is actually threat hunting, because it's hunting for a threat, but in an automated fashion. Again, as we kind of evolve into threat hunting itself, we're looking at it, okay, how can we take it to the next level, and then as our output, turn it into an automated detection or capability there too. So again, you can see there's a significant, this actually might be a good segue. It's looking at it from a hunting maturity model. So you can kind of take it from a hunting, level 0 all the way up to like a level 4, and then, kind of build upon from there. But that's kind of like a good path of capability and evolution, I would say if we're looking at it over time for an organization, that's an easy way to show, progress there. Shane, you got anything there?
Yeah, just to kind of go on that, it's just think about, one, be curious. If you're curious about your network, you're going to find those extra pieces or the gaps that you're looking at, kind of like what Justin's pointing out. He goes, if I put this in place, what things would I be missing? What areas would I not see coverage from those, and see if you can fill in the gaps that come in that place. And we can use, general ideas like that. Like, let's just say ransomware. When you see ransomware on a network, that's the end. The attacker's already been on the network for a certain period of time and done a whole number of things. That means all of your security tools before that had failed in one form or another. So you had, how did they get the original access? Where did they move around to the network? What artifacts did they leave on each one of those things? What data did they exfiltrate? Why didn't I detect any of that type of stuff before the ransomware actually was detected? So you can use that as that analogy there to go, how could I actually detect each one of those things and turn it into its own hunt right there? And you don't have to have all these fancy security tools. Just be curious, ask questions, and go, how could I figure that out?
So maybe we could sum it up as sort of applied knowledge of your blind spots.
Sure. I mean, that's one portion of it. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
This would be something really good to at least call out. And Shane's actually called this out a few times here. Baselining. And baselining is such a touchy word. People hear baselining and they just want to throw their hat off and they'll stop listening to the podcast right now. He said baselining. So, but the way that we look at it, at least part of our output from our individual threat hunts, is we help an organization understand, don't think of baselining as a holistic activity that needs to be done. Think of baselining as part of your actual threat hunting activities. So you're looking at it for a specific threat. You're going to baseline all known activity around that threat, meaning your telemetry that's generated. So you're casting a wide net. You're looking at what that data output is. Okay, now you're getting a lot of noise, but that noise is valuable because now you're baselining. You're baselining the activity around that threat. Then now what you're doing is it gives you the capability of weeding out, we'll call it potentially, known good. And then that known good allows for the known, or I should say potentially suspicious, to bubble to the surface a little bit faster by doing this. So again, it's allowing organizations to understand the methodology and process around how to get to that end goal. But again, it's the baseline activities, it's the infrastructure knowledge, because again, if a hunter is not well versed in their security infrastructure of the organization, again, they're not going to know how to properly hunt, where to hunt, and then what output they're actually going to get from the different tooling that is actually in place for them to work from. And then again, understanding that output, they may have different security tools to work from, but for a given hunt, if they have a SIM, but that SIM isn't actually receiving the logs of maybe some critical tools that they would need to look at, well, that's how you start diving into a little bit more of the complexity of understanding that from a threat hunt, I've got to look at multiple tools. And then it helps you understand logging. There's so much that goes with threat hunting that many organizations don't think about. But again, once you understand the methodology around this, it actually becomes so fun. This is kind of where I get passionate about it, because there's so many aspects to threat hunting that many overlook. But anyhow, that's just kind of like a little.
Okay, let's have some fun. How about some examples and success stories and interesting things that have come out of threat hunts?
Yeah, for sure. I'll give one, and then Shane, I'll turn it over to you. But there's a particular client that I've been working with for the last few years. And it kind of fits right into what we're talking about. They literally had, the capability of threat hunting was zero, right? They had a way that they were doing it. They were using Atomic Red Team. So this is another cool framework to use that's already scripted out. It allows you to launch, some quick attacks, and allows you to generate telemetry. And then that would be a very rudimentary way of doing threat hunting. It's using, a framework to test with to see if infrastructure actually triggers based on that activity. And then if not, okay, good, we checked the box. So that's how they started off. They also had an internal threat intelligence team that they were completely disassociated with. They weren't using them at all. Intelligence is an actual very important part to hunting. So now they went through our training. Now give them 2 or 3 years down the road, the team moved into planned threat hunts. They had a cadence mapped out. They were mapping against MITRE ATT&CK framework. They had ROI driven output from it because, again, now they had a framework to map against. So they could say, in essence, just very quickly, they were checking off techniques as they were going. So if you think of it, the threat landscape, as far as from a visual capability, was now shrinking because they were marking off capabilities. Because, again, as we talked about, the output of your hunts turn into detections. Once it's polished, again, there's a process that goes with it. We teach that. But that's just a simple, quick win of showing a client went from zero capabilities, or we'll call it very rudimentary capabilities. And then after some guidance, and obviously this was multiple threat hunting engagements that we did with them, the training, after say about 2 or 3 years, they were in a very automated capability from a threat hunting perspective. But again, it took a very methodical approach to doing it. But one thing I would also like to add, this doesn't stay within the technical layer of an organization. A heavy component of that is leadership. Having leadership involved, to steer them in the right direction, to get, the buy-in and the continuous working of multiple teams, because threat hunting involves multiple teams, because it depends, where are these threat hunters? Are they part of operations? Are they part of incident response? Are they part of, threat intel teams, what have you? But anyhow, it was a really good success factor for us to watch a client go from zero capability to a very solid, mature capability. So that's one I would say positive, client win that we had there. I'll turn it over to you, Shane.
So I don't necessarily have a client story, but I have a personal one. Because I wasn't always on the IR side of it. I did support an internal network for an organization in the past. And being a network geek, I kind of did the same type of thing. I did threat hunting before threat hunting was a thing. And one of the things that I did as a threat hunt was I was always mapping out what network protocols were running on my network because I wanted to know them. And one day, an unusual event occurred when I started seeing Apple Talk. Apple Talk should not be running on my network because I don't have Macintosh or any types of those systems running on my network. So I engaged the network team to go run this down because it was in a different office. We ended up finding it and coming down to a particular workstation or person. They had decided that they were going to bring in their own switch, their own Mac, and they were going to hook it into our network underneath their desk. So where their network jack was, they put their own switch in there so they could have as many machines as they wanted. And they set up their home network on our network so that they could do stuff during the day that they wanted to do because that was what they wanted to do and bypass all the security mechanisms. So it was kind of an interesting segue on that, but the only reason we even knew about it was because I was already hunting for network protocols that were unusual behavior. This again goes back to knowing your landscape and understanding behavioral mechanisms of your network. And it was simple. It was just it's simple type of PCAP, just looking at network, going back and forth, and then occasionally taking a look at it and seeing what's unusual. Not a hard hunt. Hunts don't have to be hard.
I gotta ask.
They're playing Warcraft, right?
Yeah. I gotta ask Shane, what was the role of the person or the user that was bringing in their own network equipment to bypass your security?
Actually, you wouldn't think it was for an insurance company. So we were workers' comp. They were in like actuarial. So they had a lot of time where they were down, meaning they didn't have work to do. So as actuarials, what they do is they kind of process policies and kind of figure out what the pricing is for it. But that if they don't have a price policy to price, they're just sitting there during the day waiting. And they just thought he'd bring his own computer in. And again, this is dating myself a little bit going back. It's when the internet was a little bit more restrictive from network's point of view. Not everybody could get there and get to where they wanted to. So I know I'm dating myself a little bit, but that was kind of the idea. There's a bunch of stories like that I can tell all day long about different things that we found and had to go chase down. But that one was always, I thought, was an interesting one.
Well, hey, I got to give a hobbyist props.
Great one, and probably one to end on because we are running a little bit long here. I've been watching Skyler in the corner this whole show biting his tongue, so I will let him have some final closing thoughts, and we will leave it there.
Thanks, Geoff. What I really liked was the definition, or I guess the separation between threat hunting and pretty much everything else in security. Your definition of a sniper and a hunter, that resonated because I hadn't thought of it like that, where when you're threat hunting, you're literally having to think about your target, think about the attacker, get in the mindset on both sides, and how would a bad person do a bad thing in the environment that you're testing with.
Well, that is our show for the day, folks. Thank you for joining us, Justin and Shane. Look forward to seeing you guys in the audience again on Security Noise in the near future. Thank you.
See you, everybody.
Thanks.